Hello and welcome to video number 4, I think. So, this is lecture 2, video 4. We're going to take just a couple of minutes to talk about some odds and ends that we missed. So the first thing that we're going to discuss is variables and identifiers. So we've been talking about variables a lot in the last few videos, and if you recall, a variable is nothing more than something that we use to save data, alright, a word or a phrase. And basically, a variable refers to a memory location where there is information saved. An example is here, radius equals 20, and this is from our very first video, in our first program example that we used. So we've created a variable named radius, and we've assigned it the value 20. This is a whole assignment statement. Now, one thing I want to note is exactly what I just said. This is a variable with the name radius. In Python, the word we use for name is identifier. So this is a variable with the identifier radius. Now that seems pretty obvious. It seems like we can just say, okay, well, a variable and an identifier are pretty much the same thing, right? But that's not strictly true. An identifier applies to more than just variables. An identifier is a name given to a variable, function, array, etc. There are a lot of different elements that we use in Python besides variables, and they all have identifiers, keywords, all kinds of things. As an example, I'm going to show you really quick now. This is a function, and we don't need to know how to create functions, but just know that this is how we do it, basically. Oops. And we start with def, which is define, and we'll have a whole chapter on functions later, but for now I want to draw your attention to this part of it. This is the name of the function. Now you'll note, this is not a variable. Remember, a variable needs an assignment statement, usually, when we're creating a variable. So for instance, here we have radius equals 20. We've got our variable on the left, our assignment operator, and then our expression or literal value on the right, our whole assignment statement. We do not have that here. This is not a variable. That's because it's a function. However, it still has a name or an identifier, and its identifier is my function. So this is a function with the identifier my function. So in this way we can see that while both variables, functions, and other elements have identifiers, an identifier and a variable are not one and the same. Another thing to keep in mind with identifiers is they must start with either a letter or an underscore. So that means that we could have, and I'm going to go ahead and comment out my function because we're not working on functions right now. But that means we could have something like, let's use my radius equals 20. This is a valid identifier. This is a variable with a valid identifier. We could have underscores. We could start with an underscore my radius. Okay. We could have my underscore radius. We could have my underscore. Actually, let's do something like this. My radius. And I'm just going to go ahead and play so we can see. And I obviously did not actually output anything here. All I'm doing is creating variables, but we don't have any errors. So you can see all of these are valid. Now what we can't do is start something with a number. We cannot have something like 1 my radius equals 20. We will run into an error because it starts with a number. Whenever Python sees a number, it expects that it's going to see a number. So when it sees something like this, it gets confused. So our identifiers must start with a letter or an underscore. I could have numbers in my identifier, so I could have my radius 1. That's totally fine. The same goes for up here. If I uncomment this real fast, go ahead and play. Obviously we have no errors, and I'll just put a little message here. so that we know we made it to the end and there were no errors. But if I add a number in the beginning of this, I'm going to run into an error. Okay, so it's the same thing. Even though we're starting a function here, if we start it with a number, Python's going to error out. But if we change it to an underscore or leave it like this, that is totally fine. So a valid identifier must start with either a letter or an underscore. And that is how we do that.